So I don't know if you've ever watched a movie where it kind of seems like the movie has ended, and you think, right, and you're sort of like, finding your keys and getting ready to get out of the cinema before the rush. And then it just goes on for another 20 minutes. Have you ever watched that kind of movie? It seems like it's coming into land. Have you ever sat in one of those preaches, like where it seems like it's coming into land and then somehow it just goes on for another 15 minutes? Those are Alex. Sorry, got that party feeling. I'll try and keep it under control. Well, John's gospel is really like that. At the end of chapter 20, it really seems like it's ended. He does like a kind of final wrapping up and everything. But then you get this one more chapter. And it's the stuff that happens in the after. And it's this story of Jesus having breakfast on the beach with the disciples. And it's kind of like, it's this appearance of Jesus that happens after they've left Jerusalem. Jerusalem is like the spiritual place where all the spiritual stuff happens. But now they are back on the beach in the ordinary. They're back. This is the Sea of Galilee. This is actually a picture of the Sea of Galilee. How cool is that? And they're back at the Sea of Galilee. Do you know what? Their story has come full circle to the point of the story that Chipper told us last week. They're back out in a boat again. Jesus is taking them back to the very beginning, to this moment where they got their sense of mission and sense of purpose, when Jesus said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. But this isn't that point. This is way later, after Jesus has died, after he's been resurrected, after he's seen them a few times already. And 7 of them just say one day, let's just go out in the boat. And they go out fishing and, this looks familiar. I've seen this before. They go out in the boat and they don't catch anything. Do you know, I think when we read something like that in the Bible, we're supposed to remember the thing that happened before. We're supposed to remember. Now, the story that Chipper told isn't actually in John's gospel, but I think John thinks we know about it. I think John thinks that we've read at least Mark's gospel at this point, because he shows them back in this boat, and they've had a rough week. They've had a heavy week. They've been at the cross and they've run away. Or Peter, he's been there, he's denied Jesus 3 times. And then Jesus has come back for these short times and it's been amazing. And then in the middle, they're kind of... So, it's safe to say they're a bit all over the place and they decide to go out in the boat and they get this catch of no fish at all. And they're coming back and they're dejected. And then they see this bloke on the beach and they don't know who he is. They don't recognize him. And he says, put the net out on the other side. And we think, we've heard this before. We know what's going to happen now, don't we? Because we've read the other story. But they don't seem to get it at that point. It's only when they put the nets out and suddenly they're hauling back in another abundant, miraculous catch of fish that suddenly they twig, it's Jesus on the beach. Even after the end... I forgot the clicky doobry. It's over there. Could you grab it for me? Even after the end, the miraculous is happening. Even after the interesting... It's all right, I just spotted it. Hang on. Thank you. Even after the big climax of the story of Jesus' death and resurrection, even after that, on the boat, Jesus is performing miraculous signs. Even back in the ordinary places, Jesus is still doing miraculous things in the middle of ordinary places of life. I think this is a really interesting thing about Jesus' miracles, is that they happen in amongst the ordinary life. They happen at people's weddings. They happen when people are sick. They happen on the streets. They happen in the temple. They happen near the shops. That's where the miraculous happens, in the middle of ordinary life. So these guys have gone back from Jerusalem and they've gone back to their ordinary life, and Jesus is still at work in the ordinary. And they leap out of the boat when they realize it's Jesus. And they run up and they find that Jesus has lit a fire on the beach. And he's already cooking some fish. We don't work out where he gets those fish from, but that's Jesus for you. He's cooking some fish. And I wonder, this is just me wondering, does Peter shudder when he smells that smell? Because the last time that we see Peter standing next to a charcoal fire, it's in a courtyard. It's dark. He's terrified. And he's saying, no, that Jesus, I never knew him. 3 times. And here he is coming back and sitting by a charcoal fire again and smelling that smell. I want you to imagine the last barbecue you went to. Given the weather this week, I imagine it wasn't that long ago that you were smelling burning charcoal, maybe even burning fish or burning sausages. That's the smell that Peter smelled, and I wonder if it made him shudder a little bit, even in his joy at seeing Jesus again. And Jesus cooks them breakfast. Who ends a book or a story with breakfast? Breakfast is a beginning. I teach story writing, and I would teach people, you don't end with breakfast unless there's a sequel. Yeah? At the end of some of those superhero movies where you see the superheroes going back to their family and starting again and back in their ordinary life, that's because we know there's a sequel. It's not the end of the story. I think that's why this is breakfast. And then this happens, and I think this is really interesting. Jesus came and he took the bread and he gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. Okay, where have you seen that before? Anybody? Where have we seen that before? Bread and fish. Jesus taking it and breaking it and giving it to people. The feeding of the 5,000 with Sanjay. I've still got the pilchards, by the way, if anybody actually likes those. This is what it says. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed those to those who were seated as much as they wanted, and he did with the same with the fish. That's John's version of the feeding of the 5,000. That's John's version of this passage. We are supposed to think about the feeding of the 5,000. We are supposed to remember that Jesus is still the good shepherd. He is still the leader and feeder and lover and caretaker of his flock that he was before he died and resurrected. He hasn't got so important that this job is not important anymore. And this story actually becomes part of this amazing narrative that goes from Psalm 23 all the way through of God and of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Because he sits them down on green grass at the feeding of the 5,000. And like Sanjay said, that's supposed to make us think of the shepherd in Psalm 23. And here he takes bread and fish and he breaks it and he gives it to his disciples. And that's supposed to make us think of the feeding of the 5,000. It's part of the whole one story. Even after the death and the resurrection, Jesus is the lover, the feeder, the caretaker of his sheep. And then you've got, look, there you go, there he is. And then you've got Peter sitting around that campfire. And you get this really beautiful thing that happens. 3 times Jesus asks him the question, do you love me? Why do you think he asks it 3 times? I think it's because Peter denied him 3 times. I I think there's probably quite a lot going on in Peter's heart right at this moment, don't you? And Jesus, every time that Jesus says, "Do you love me?" Peter's there and he says, "I love you. Of course I love you. Of course I love you." And Jesus says to him, "Feed my sheep. Tend my lambs. Feed my lambs." Jesus gives Peter this job to do. Now, I looked at this and I think, if somebody has royally messed up, like Peter has royally messed up, our inclination sometimes is to give them a job to do where they can't do too much damage. We rehabilitate people slowly, don't we? Because I think, I know, I'll let you do something where no one's really going to see what you're doing. You can work your way back up. There is none of that with Jesus. Jesus just goes right in there and gives Peter his purpose back. Even after this massive failure, Jesus goes right in there and says, "This is your purpose. This is what I have called you to. This is still what I've called you to." Now, I think that we tend to count ourselves out of things. You do something once and you mess it up, and then you count yourself out of that again and say, "Well, that can't be what God is calling me to do because I messed up." I spoke to somebody this week, a girl in Pakistan who's on our media school. She is 24 years old, and she said to me, "I really believe that because when I was 21, I fell away from God and I actually denied that God exists. I actually told people that I thought that God didn't exist. And I really believe that that meant that God wouldn't ever be able to use me in the future, even though I had come back to him." And I read this story with her, and I said, that's not how it works in God's kingdom. Making a mistake, having a failure, that doesn't count you out forever in God's kingdom. Because what Jesus cares about in that moment is, do you love me? That is what counts. I'm trying to see the clock through the blinding lights. That's all right. So, this is the message of today. There is hope. There is hope if you think that you've run out of time to serve God. If you are living in the after, if you are living in the after my 20s, if you're living in the after my kids have grown up, if you're living in the after retirement, then there is hope that God will have a purpose for you, because he had a purpose for Peter in the even after. Even after it looked like the story was finished, there was a purpose for Peter and a purpose for his disciples. There is hope for even after a really exciting conference. Even if you feel like the exciting thing is done and you've got to go back to being in the boat, you've got to go back to standing on the beach, like for Peter. You've got to go back into the ordinary, going to school, going to college. Even after that, there is hope and purpose for you, because there's purpose for Peter. And there is hope today for those people who remember a more exciting, more intimate, more wonderful time with Jesus that they had somewhere in their past. Because there is hope in the even after, because Jesus is still Jesus. He has not changed. The Jesus that you heard speaking at the conference will be standing next to you when you go back to school. The Jesus that some of you guys knew in the country that you came from, he is here as well. The Jesus that I remember when I was standing at a conference singing History Maker and believing every word of it, he is still at work in my life. He still has a purpose for me. He is still got a purpose for me that means I am still going to be a history maker. And it might not look exactly like I thought it was going to when I was 22. It's all right, guys. You don't know that song. But, it's part of our history. Jesus is still Jesus. And there is still hope. There is still life. There is still purpose. And there is a future in which he will do more than we consider to be possible right now. So I'm going to pray for you. If even one of those things just niggled at your heart as I said it, for all those who were with me singing History Maker and wondering, I'm going to be 50 next year. I'm kind of like thinking, okay, Jesus, where's this history making? If you're in that place, then I'm praying for you. If you were at a conference last week and it was exciting and you're wondering about what it's going to be like to follow Jesus when September starts, this prayer is for you. If you're one of the people who has made a royal mess of something and kind of wants to count yourself out from being able to serve God in the future, then know that there is forgiveness and grace and fresh starts in the kingdom, because that is who Jesus is. Father, we are just amazed at your abundance and your mercy and your forgiveness. Thank you that when you break in, there are 153 fish, not 2. Thank you that when you break in, even when we sit surrounded by the scent of our failure, you breathe in the sweetness of forgiveness and hope and new beginnings. Thank you that with you, life is always breakfast. There's always opportunity for a fresh start and a new day. And I pray, Lord, that you will help us to walk in that. Amen.